April 12, 1942, MacDill Field, Florida. Second Lieutenant James Harper watched his new aircraft taxi onto the tarmac and felt his stomach drop. The B-26 Marauder sat there on the concrete like some predatory bird, all sharp angles and cramped fuselage, its wings impossibly short for a bomber that size. Harper had trained on the comfortable, forgiving B-17. This thing looked like it wanted to kill you just sitting still. His instructor, a grizzled major named Patterson, walked up beside him and said something Harper would never forget. "That aircraft will murder you if you give it half a chance. Respect it, or it'll put you in the ground before you ever see combat." Harper wrote to his mother that night from his barracks. He told her about the Marauder, about how the other pilots called it the Widowmaker, how there was a saying going around the base that a Marauder a day keeps the population away. He didn't tell her that 3 crews had died that week alone, all in training accidents. He didn't mention that the aircraft had killed more American airmen in training than the Germans had shot down in combat. He was 22 years old, fresh out of flight school, and he was terrified. The B-26 Marauder was born from a 1939 Army Air Corps requirement for a medium bomber that could fly faster than any fighter then in service. The Glenn L. Martin Company delivered exactly what was asked for. The Marauder could reach 315 miles per hour, faster than the standard pursuit planes of the day, but that speed came at a terrible price. To achieve those velocities, Martin gave it wings that were far too small for the aircraft's weight. The wing loading, the pounds of weight per square foot of wing area, was the highest of any American aircraft then flying. At 53 pounds per square foot, it was nearly double that of the B-17. Those stubby wings meant the Marauder had to fly fast constantly. If you slowed down too much, especially on approach or takeoff, the aircraft simply stopped flying and dropped like a stone. The statistics from those early training days read like a horror story. At MacDill Field alone, 15 B-26s crashed in a single month in early 1942. The accident rate was so catastrophic that the Senate formed a special committee led by Harry Truman to investigate whether the entire program should be canceled. Pilots were refusing to fly it. Ground crews were placing bets on which aircraft wouldn't make it back. The gallows humor was dark, even by military standards. One pilot, Captain Frank Mims from Georgia, wrote in his diary that the B-26 had a perfect takeoff technique. You point it down the runway, apply full power, and pray to whatever God will listen. But here's where the story takes its turn. A handful of pilots and instructors refused to accept that the Marauder was simply a flawed aircraft. Lieutenant Colonel James Maitland, assigned to investigate the accidents, spent 3 months flying the B-26 himself, analyzing every crash report, interviewing survivors. What he discovered was radical. The aircraft wasn't fundamentally unsafe. The training was wrong. The Army had been teaching pilots to fly the Marauder using techniques developed for aircraft like the B-18 and B-17, aircraft with big forgiving wings and docile handling. Those techniques were deadly in a Marauder. Maitland wrote a report that changed everything. He argued that the B-26 needed to be flown hot and fast at all times. On approach, pilots were slowing down too much, trying to land at speeds comfortable for other bombers. The Marauder stalled and crashed. Maitland demonstrated that if you kept the speed up, came in at 130 miles per hour instead of the 100 they'd been teaching, the aircraft handled beautifully. On takeoff, pilots were rotating, lifting the nose, too early. The Marauder needed more speed before it would fly. Let it accelerate to 120 miles per hour on the ground. then lift smoothly. The aircraft would leap into the sky. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It took months of new training protocols, of senior pilots like Maitland personally demonstrating the techniques, of slowly rebuilding the shattered confidence of crews who had watched their friends die. Lieutenant Harper, that young pilot who had been so terrified on his first day, became one of Maitland's early converts. Harper later wrote about his 10th training flight under the new procedures. "Everything they told us before was wrong," he wrote. "This aircraft doesn't want to kill you. It wants to fly. But you have to speak its language. You can't baby it. You have to be aggressive, confident, always ahead of it. The moment you get timid, the moment you slow down and try to be gentle, that's when it'll bite you." By late 1942, the accident rate had dropped dramatically. The 22nd Bomb Group, one of the first to deploy with Marauders to the Pacific, initially suffered horrendous losses in training. But after the new procedures were implemented, they completed their training cycle with only one accident. The pilots who mastered the Marauder became fiercely protective of it. They knew something other airmen didn't. They were flying the fastest medium bomber in the world, an aircraft that could outrun most fighters if flown properly. Then came the combat test. The 322nd Bomb Group deployed to England in early 1943. Their first mission, on May 14, 1943, was a disaster that almost ended the Marauders' combat career. 11 B-26s attacked a power station at IJmuiden in Holland, flying at low altitude to stay under radar. They flew into a wall of flak so intense that witnesses said the sky turned black with explosions. The Germans had known they were coming. All 11 aircraft were hit. One exploded in midair. Another crashed into the sea. A third made it back to England, but was so damaged it broke apart on landing. Captain Robert Robinson, piloting one of the surviving aircraft, counted 187 holes in his bomber. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Thomas Wade, had been wounded by shrapnel. Their radio operator was dead. The mission reports made grim reading. But Robinson, despite losing crew members, despite nearly dying himself, wrote something remarkable in his after-action report. "The aircraft saved us," he wrote. "We took hits that would have shredded a B-17. The Marauder's structure held together. We flew home on one engine. The cockpit was shot to pieces, but the controls still responded. This aircraft is tougher than anyone realizes." The 322nd was taken off low-level missions. The new tactics had them flying at medium altitude, 10,000 to 15,000 feet, where the bombers could use their speed and the tight box formations they'd perfected in training. This is where the Marauder found its true calling. Through late 1943 and into 1944, B-26 groups in Europe flew thousands of missions against bridges, rail yards, airfields, and coastal defenses. Their accuracy was legendary. The Marauder could hold formation better than any other American bomber. Those short wings that made it so dangerous to inexperienced pilots made it incredibly stable as a bombing platform. Staff Sergeant Michael Durante, a bombardier with the 386th Bomb Group, described the difference in his letters home to Brooklyn. Durante had flown B-24s before transferring to Marauders. In a B-24, he wrote, "You're fighting the aircraft the whole bomb run. It wallows, drifts. The pilot is constantly correcting. In the Marauder, once we're set up, it's like the aircraft is on rails. Rock steady. I can put bombs on a target the size of a barn from 12,000 feet. We're not just hitting the general area. We're destroying specific buildings, specific sections of railroad track. The Germans are terrified of us. The numbers bear out Durante's confidence." B-26 groups in Europe ultimately achieved the lowest loss rate of any American bomber type, less than 0.5%. Consider that number. For every 200 missions flown, fewer than one aircraft was lost. The B-17 and B-24 groups, flying against heavily defended targets deep in Germany, suffered losses of 5 to 6% per mission. Some missions saw losses exceeding 10%. The Marauder crews, flying against tactical targets in France and the Low Countries, came home with remarkable consistency. But that low loss rate didn't mean the missions were easy or safe. Lieutenant William Anderson flew 52 missions with the 391st Bomb Group. His diary entries paint a picture of constant danger that somehow never quite caught them. He describes a mission on June 2, 1944, just days before D-Day, attacking coastal gun emplacements near Calais. "The flak was so thick you could walk on it," Anderson wrote. "Our aircraft shook from near misses. The bomber on our right wing took a direct hit in the bomb bay and simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, the next moment just falling debris. But the rest of us held formation, dropped our bombs, and got out. The Marauder can take punishment. We had hydraulic lines severed, one engine damaged, half our instruments dead. We flew home and landed like it was just another training flight." The ground crews developed a special relationship with the Marauders. Technical Sergeant Raymond Kowalski, a crew chief with the 344th Bomb Group, kept notes throughout his service. Kowalski had worked on B-17 stateside before deploying to England with Marauders. His notes reveal the aircraft's complexity and the dedication required to keep them flying. "The Marauder is a maintenance nightmare," he wrote. "Everything is packed tight. To change certain components, we have to remove half the aircraft. The engines require constant attention. But I've seen these aircraft come back with damage that would have grounded anything else. I've seen them land with entire control surfaces shot away, with engines on fire, with hydraulics gone. I've patched up aircraft on Monday that were flying missions again by Wednesday. The pilots trust us to keep them flying, and we trust the aircraft to bring them home." As D-Day approached, Marauder groups flew an increasingly critical role. They attacked the transportation network across northern France, systematically destroying bridges and rail yards to isolate the Normandy battlefield. The 9th Air Force, which controlled the medium bomber groups, flew over 1,000 sorties on June 6th alone. Captain Harold Daniels, commanding a squadron in the 387th Bomb Group, flew 3 missions on D-Day. In his personal account, written years later, Daniels described the surreal experience of watching the invasion unfold below while focusing on his tactical mission. "We were hitting a bridge near Caen," he wrote. "Flying over the channel, we could see the entire invasion fleet spread out like toys on a pond. Thousands of ships. The scale was impossible to comprehend. But we had our job. We put our bombs on that bridge, cut it in half, turned east, and hit another bridge on the way home. Then we landed, they refueled, and rearmed us, and we went back up to hit a rail yard." The ground crews worked miracles that day. No time for proper maintenance. Just fuel, bombs, ammunition, and go. The campaign in France showed what the Marauder could do when properly employed. From D-Day through the end of August 1944, B-26 groups flew over 50,000 sorties. They destroyed or damaged thousands of targets. The German transportation network in France collapsed under the relentless precision bombing. Unlike the heavy bombers attacking German cities and industrial centers, the medium bombers could see their results immediately. Bridges down, rail lines cut, convoys scattered. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding German forces in Normandy, repeatedly cited Allied air superiority, particularly the medium bombers, as making movement during daylight impossible. Lieutenant Harper, That pilot who had been so frightened of the Marauder back in 1942 finished his tour in September 1944. He had flown 65 missions. In his final letter home before rotating back to the States, Harper reflected on his journey with the aircraft. 2 years ago, I thought this machine was death itself, he wrote. Now I can't imagine having flown anything else. The Marauder demanded respect. It demanded skill. It didn't forgive mistakes. But once you understood it, once you learned to fly it the way it wanted to be flown, it became the finest aircraft in the sky. I trusted my life to it 65 times. It never let me down. The final statistics of the B-26 in European combat tell the story of a complete reversal. That aircraft with the horrific training accident rate, that Widowmaker that nearly got canceled by Congress, ended the war with the lowest loss rate of any American bomber. Nearly 130,000 combat sorties. 184,000 tons of bombs dropped, a loss rate of 0.47%. No other American bomber came close to that record of survivability and effectiveness. The transformation wasn't about the aircraft changing. The B-26 that flew combat missions in 1945 was fundamentally the same aircraft that had killed so many pilots in training in 1942. What changed was understanding. The pilots learned to fly it properly. The commanders learned to employ it correctly. The ground crews learned to maintain it effectively. And from that understanding came mastery. The crews who had tamed the Widowmaker knew they flew the best medium bomber of the war. Staff Sergeant Durante, that bombardier from Brooklyn, came home in January 1945. He attended a reunion of his bomb group in 1972 and gave a speech that was recorded. Durante spoke about what the Marauder meant to the men who flew it. We were proud, he said. Proud that we'd mastered something so difficult. Every other bomber pilot looked at the Marauder and was glad they didn't have to fly it. But we knew the truth. We were flying the hot rod. The aircraft that could go places others couldn't, do things others couldn't, and come home when others wouldn't have made it. The Marauder wasn't the Widowmaker. It was our guardian angel. We just had to learn its language first. That's the real story of the B-26 Marauder. Not an inherently flawed aircraft that was fixed, but a demanding aircraft that required excellence from its crews. It separated the good pilots from the great ones. It punished mediocrity and rewarded skill. And the men who flew it, those pilots and bombardiers and navigators and gunners and crew chiefs, transformed themselves in the process. They became the masters of the coffin that refused to be tamed by anyone unwilling to meet it on its own terms. They learned to respect the machine, and the machine, in turn, brought them home.